In the wake of the monsoon, the Gangetic plains of the 4th century BCE steamed with life and latent power. For centuries, the land of Bharata, India, was a tapestry of warring kingdoms and republics, its vibrant cultural and philosophical dynamism overshadowed by the relentless clash of arms. The Nanda Empire, ruling from the magnificent city of Pataliputra, held sway over a vast territory, its coffers overflowing, its army a seemingly invincible force of hundreds of thousands. Yet, the Nandas were despised, their rule considered oppressive and tyrannical by their subjects. The land was ripe for a confluence of events, a catalyst that would fuse these disparate states into a single, breathtaking entity. That catalyst would not emerge from within the Nanda court, but from the arid hills of the northwest, in the form of a foreign invader whose shadow would inadvertently give birth to an empire of light, Alexander of Macedon. His whirlwind campaign in 326 BCE, though it barely scratched the surface of the subcontinent, shattered the illusion of invincibility surrounding the great powers of the East. More importantly, it introduced new tactics, new anxieties, and a new geopolitical reality. And in the chaotic aftermath of his retreat, it was a young man from the margins of power, a figure of obscure birth but boundless ambition, who would see the pattern in the chaos and dare to grasp the reins of destiny. His name was Chandragupta Maurya. Book I, The Rise of the Peacock, c. 322–298 BCE. Chapter 1, The Brahmin and the Outcast. The air in Takshashila, the ancient center of learning, was thick with both intellectual fervor and political tension. The city had bowed to Alexander, and now, after the Macedonians' death, it seethed with rebellion. In a sparsely furnished chamber, two men plotted the unthinkable. One was Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, a Brahmin scholar whose intellect was as sharp as his temper. Humiliated once by the Nanda king, he had sworn an oath not to tie his topknot until he saw the empire destroyed. His companion was Chandragupta Maurya, young, fierce, and possessing a magnetic charisma that belied his questionable origins. Some called him a prince of a minor clan, the Mauryas, others whispered he was the son of a Nanda prince and a maidservant, of Rishala, lowborn. To Chanakya, his pedigree was irrelevant, it was the fire in his eyes that mattered. Power is a river, Chandragupta, Chanakya rasped, unrolling a map scratched on birch bark. The Nandas sit at its mouth, believing they control the flow. But they have forgotten the source. They have forgotten the people. Chandragupta's gaze was fixed on Pataliputra, far to the southeast. A river can be dammed. Or diverted. Exactly, Chanakya's finger stabbed at the northwestern frontiers. We start here, in the lands the Yavnas, Greeks, have polluted and abandoned. Their garrisons are weak, their satraps squabbling. The people here know no loyalty to the Nandas. They will follow strength. Their first attempts were humble. They raised a mercenary army, a ragged band of adventurers, disaffected tribesmen, and former soldiers. Chanakya's genius lay not in warfare, but in strategy, the Rajmandal, circle of states, theory, where every neighbor is either a potential enemy or a usable ally. He taught Chandragupta the art of Sam, Dam, Danda, Bed, conciliation, gifts, punishment, and division. They employed spies, the lifeblood of their future empire, who whispered secrets and sowed discord in enemy camps. Their initial assault on the Nanda heartland was a disaster. Pataliputra's walls were too high, its garrison too vast. Chastened, Chandragupta and Chanakya learned a vital lesson. They retreated to the forests, building their support village by village, championing the cause of the oppressed against petty Nanda officials. They were not just conquerors, they were liberators. Slowly, the river of power began to shift its course. Chapter 2, The Fall of the Nandas. The final campaign against the Nandas was a masterpiece of psychological and military warfare. While Chandragupta's growing legions, now a disciplined force, marched from the northwest, Chanakya's network of agents worked within Pataliputra itself. They spread propaganda, highlighting the Nanda king Dhanananda's greed and Chandragupta's virtuous cause. They bribed key ministers and generals, turning the empire's core to rot. The decisive battle was not fought at the gates of Pataliputra, but in the minds of its defenders. When Chandragupta's army finally appeared, the Nanda forces, though larger, were demoralized and riven with treason. The fighting was fierce, but the outcome was inevitable. Dhanananda was deposed, and according to some traditions, allowed to leave the city with a cartload of treasures, a hollow echo of his former wealth. Chandragupta Maurya entered Pataliputra not as a plunderer, but as a sovereign. The citizens, expecting more bloodshed, watched in awe as he marched to the palace, his peacock standard, Mayuradhwaja, flying high as symbol of his Maurya lineage and a new dawn. His first act was one of consolidation. He established his capital in the very heart of his defeated foe's power, but he would rule with a different philosophy. Chapter 3, The Sandalwood Throne. Chandragupta's throne was not one of gold, but of polished sandalwood, a testament to the practical, austere ethos instilled by Chanakya. The real power, however, lay in the system they created, a bureaucracy of staggering complexity and efficiency, detailed in Chanakya's political treatise, the Arthashastra. The empire was divided into provinces, each under a royal prince or a trusted governor. A vast civil service, the Amatyas, managed everything from revenue collection and irrigation to public works and espionage. The Gopa kept records of every plot of land and every household, while the Sthanika oversaw district administration. Taxes were heavy but systematic, funding a state that was deeply interventionist. The government controlled mines, shipbuilding, and even spinning and weaving, creating a state monopoly on key goods like armor and salt. But the crown jewel of the Mauryan military machine was the standing army. Megasthenes, the Seleucid Greek ambassador to Chandragupta's court, recorded its mind-boggling scale, a board of 6 subboards for the navy, logistics, infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. The Elephant Corps, in particular, was the ancient equivalent of a tank division, a terrifying force on the battlefield. This immense apparatus was paid for by a land tax of 1/4 to 1/6 of the produce, a toll that the people bore for the unprecedented peace and security it provided, the Pax Maurya. Chapter 4, The Settlement with the West. Chandragupta's gaze soon turned back to the northwest. The Hellenistic kingdoms born from Alexander's empire still cast long shadows. Seleucus I Nicator, one of Alexander's most capable successors, sought to reclaim the Indian territories of his former master. Around 305 BCE, he crossed the Indus, expecting to face a fractured landscape. Instead, he found a unified empire under a determined and brilliant king. The details of the war are lost, but the outcome is a testament to Chandragupta's power. Seleucus was soundly defeated, not just on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. In the ensuing treaty, Seleucus ceded vast territories, including Gandhara, Arachosia, and Gidrosia, modern-day Kandahar, Kabul, and Balochistan, to Chandragupta. In return, he received a symbolic gift of 500 war elephants, animals that would prove decisive in his own wars against his rivals in the West. More than a territorial exchange, the treaty was a diplomatic revolution. It established formal relations between the Mauryan and Hellenistic worlds. Megasthenes was sent as a permanent ambassador to Pataliputra, and his writings, though lost, formed the basis of much of our external knowledge of the early Mauryan court. The Mauryan Empire now stretched from the Bay of Bengal to the Arabian Sea, an unbroken realm of immense wealth and power. Book 2, The Architect of Dharma, c. 298 to 272 BCE. Chandragupta, in his old age, is said to have abdicated the throne, becoming an ascetic and follower of the Jain saint Bhadrabahu. He journeyed to Shravanabeлагala in Karnataka, where he fasted unto death, a final act of renunciation in a life defined by acquisition. His son, Bindusara, succeeded him. Bindusara's reign is a historical interlude, a period of consolidation. He was known as Amitragata, the slayer of foes, suggesting military campaigns, likely in the Deccan Plateau, extending Mauryan suzerainty southwards. He maintained diplomatic ties with the West, famously asking the Seleucid king Antiochus I for sweet wine, figs, and a philosopher, to which Antiochus replied that he would send the wine and figs, but Greek philosophers were not for export. But it was his son who would transform the empire from a political entity into a moral one. Chapter 5, The Prince in the Garden of Gauri. The third Mauryan emperor was not born to be king. His name was Ashoka, and he was one of Bindusara's many sons. Described in the Sri Lankan chronicles, the Mahavamsa, as so ugly and ill-natured that his father despised him, Ashoka was sent as a viceroy to the turbulent city of Ujjain to keep him from court. When Bindusara lay dying, a brutal war of succession erupted. The palace chronicles speak of Ashoka, the fierce, Chanda Ashoka, storming the capital, Pataliputra, and slaughtering his 99 brothers to secure the throne. While this is likely an exaggeration, it points to a bloody and contested accession around 268 BCE. For the first 8 years of his reign, Ashoka ruled in the traditional mold of his grandfather, a powerful, expansionist monarch. The last independent holdout against Mauryan rule was the formidable kingdom of Kalinga, on the east coast, modern-day Odisha. Rich from maritime trade, proud of its republican traditions, Kalinga was a thorn in the empire's side. In 261 BCE, Ashoka marched. The Battle of the Daya River was not a battle, it was a slaughter. The Kalingans fought with desperate courage, but they were overwhelmed by the Mauryan juggernaut. The edict Ashoka later had inscribed on a rock at the site describes the aftermath with haunting clarity. 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed, and many times that number perished. Chapter 6, The Transformation. Ashoka walked through the aftermath of the victory. The air was thick with the stench of death. The river ran red. The ground was littered with the corpses of soldiers, but also of men, women, and children caught in the carnage. The wails of the bereaved and the dying filled his ears. The sight of so much suffering, so much devastation wrought by his command, shattered something within him. The conquest that was meant to be his greatest glory now felt like an unspeakable crime. The title Chanda Ashoka tasted of ash. This profound personal crisis, this angst, led to a spiritual and political revolution. He encountered the teachings of the Buddha, a philosophy that preached non-violence, ahimsa, compassion, karuna, and the path to end suffering. Ashoka embraced Buddhism, not as a personal escape, but as the governing principle of his empire. He did not renounce the world like his grandfather, he would change it from within. He declared a new policy, Dhamma, the Prakrit word for Dharma. This was not orthodox Buddhism, but a sophisticated moral code for public life, emphasizing piety, obedience to parents, respect for teachers and elders, kindness to servants and slaves, and, most importantly, nonviolence towards all living beings. He abolished the royal hunt, and meat consumption in the palace was drastically reduced. But his Dhamma was a secular ethic, appealing to Brahmins, Jains, Ajivikas, and all sects alike. Chapter 7, The Voice of the Emperor. To propagate his Dhamma, Ashoka embarked on one of history's most remarkable campaigns of public communication. He had his edicts carved onto pillars of polished sandstone, topped with magnificent animal capitals like the four-leonid Sarnath pillar, now India's national emblem, and on rock faces across the empire, from modern-day Afghanistan to Karnataka, and from Gujarat to Odisha. These edicts were not boasts of military glory, but intimate conversations with his subjects. They were written not in the Sanskrit of the elite, but in the vernacular Prakrit, using the local Brahmi script. In them, Ashoka speaks not as a god-king, but as a father concerned for his children's welfare. All men are my children, he declares in the Kalinga edicts. Just as I seek the welfare and happiness of my own children in this world and the next, I seek the same for all men. He appointed a new class of officials, the Dhamma Mahamatas, whose sole duty was to promote Dhamma and ensure the welfare of the people, including the elderly, the imprisoned, and even the empire's rival neighbors. He built hospitals for men and animals, dug wells, and planted shade trees along roads. He sent diplomatic missions to the Hellenistic kings, Antiochus II of Syria, Ptolemy II Philadelphus of Egypt, Antigonus Gonatas of Macedonia, and others, carrying not threats, but the message of Dhamma. The empire under Ashoka became a vast, peaceful, and prosperous welfare state. The relentless machinery of the Mauryan state, once geared for war, was now redirected towards the happiness of its people. It was an experiment in benevolent autocracy on a scale the world had never seen. Book 3, The Unraveling, c. 232 to 185 BCE. Chapter 8, The Weight of the Lotus. Ashoka ruled for nearly 40 years, a long reign of peace and piety. But no system, however perfectly designed, can survive the entropy of time and the frailties of human nature. The immense cost of the welfare state, the vast bureaucracy, and the large standing army, even in peacetime, placed a heavy burden on the economy. The land tax, the lifeblood of the empire, began to feel oppressive without the unifying threat of external war. Further, Ashoka's extreme advocacy of ahimsa may have weakened the martial spirit of the Mauryan army and the Kshatriya, warrior, class who formed its core. The empire, which had been forged and maintained by the sword, was now being asked to sheath it permanently. The outer provinces, particularly in the northwest and the Deccan, began to chafe under the distant control of Pataliputra. When Ashoka died around 232 BCE, the empire passed to weaker successors. The later Mauryas were a pale shadow of their forebears. The Yuga Purana describes them as incompetent, unable to control their subordinates or defend the realm. The great edicts of Dhamma were forgotten, the polished pillars standing as silent, lonely monuments to a dream that was fading. Chapter 9, The Brahminical Resurgence and the Final Act. The centralizing power of the Mauryas had always been in tension with the traditional power of the Brahmin priesthood. The Mauryan patronage of heterodox sects like Buddhism and Jainism, particularly under Ashoka, had sidelined the Vedic Brahmins and their ritualistic authority. The final blow came from the last Mauryan emperor of note, Brihadratha. He was confronted by his Brahmin commander-in-chief, Pushyamitra Shunga. During a military review, Pushyamitra incited the army to revolt, accusing the king of weakness and impiety. In a public spectacle, he slew the feeble Brihadratha and seized the throne around 185 BCE. The Maurya Empire, which had unified a subcontinent for over 130 years, was overthrown in an instant. The Shunga dynasty that followed was aggressively Brahminical, reviving Vedic sacrifices and, according to Buddhist sources, persecuting Buddhists. The unified subcontinent fractured. The northwest fell first to the Bactrian Greeks and then to a succession of invaders, Shakas, Parthians, and Kushanas. The south broke away into independent kingdoms like the Satavahanas. Epilogue: The Enduring Pillars. The Mauryan Empire collapsed, but its legacy was indelibly etched into the soul of India. It provided the first and only blueprint for a nearly pan-Indian political unity, a concept of Chakravartin, a universal ruler, that would inspire every subsequent dynasty for 2 millennia. Chanakya's Arthashastra remains a foundational text of statecraft. The Mauryan administrative structure, from the village Gopa to the provincial governor, became the template for future Indian governments. But the most profound legacy was Ashoka's. For centuries, the great emperor was forgotten, his name surviving only in Buddhist legends and a few Puranic lists. It was only in the 19th century, when British antiquarians like James Prinsep deciphered the Brahmi script on the pillars and rocks scattered across the land, that Ashoka's voice was heard again. The world rediscovered a ruler who, at the height of his power, chose conscience over conquest, and who spoke to his people not of his own glory, but of their shared humanity. The 4 lions of Sarnath, silent for over 2,000 years, now roar again from the national emblem of the Republic of India, a permanent reminder that the true strength of an empire lies not in the territory it controls, but in the ideals it champions. The story of the Mauryas is the story of India's first great experiment with itself, a story of brutal power, profound transformation, and an enduring quest for a just rule. The coup that ended Brihadratha's life was as swift as it was brutal. The Mauryan army, perhaps disillusioned by a century of peace and a perceived erosion of their traditional warrior ethos, did not rise to defend their emperor. Pushyamitra Shunga, having seized the throne, embarked on a deliberate campaign to erase the ideological foundations of the Mauryan state. The capital, Pataliputra, remained, but its spirit was transformed. The elaborate ceremonies of the Ashvamedha, horse sacrifice, replaced the quiet contemplation of Dhamma. The court Brahmins, long sidelined, now held the king's ear. The empire fractured with astonishing speed. Like a great tree felled in the forest, the collapse of the central trunk revealed that the roots had already rotted. The outlying provinces, which had been held together by the immense prestige of the Mauryan name and the efficient, if heavy-handed, bureaucracy, now broke away. Chapter 10, The Fracturing of the World. In the northwest, the first to feel the winds of change were the Greek satraps of Bactria. No longer constrained by the formidable Mauryan army, men like Demetrius I and Menander, Milinda in Indian sources, crossed the Hindu Kush. They established a thriving Indo-Greek kingdom, with capitals at Taxila and Sagala. The cultural fusion was remarkable. Greek gods were depicted on coins in the posture of the Buddha, and philosophical dialogues, like the Milinda Panha, recorded the discussions between King Menander and the Buddhist sage Nagasena. The Mauryan bulwark that had once forced a treaty with Seleucus was gone, and the subcontinent was once again open to influences from the Central Asian steppes. Further south, in the Deccan Plateau and the west, the Satavahanas declared their independence. They would become the great consolidators of the post-Mauryan South, portraying themselves as the rightful heirs to the Mauryan legacy, even as they championed Vedic Brahmanism. In Kalinga, King Karvela of the Mahameghavahana dynasty rose to power. His Hathigumpha inscription is a direct, boastful counterpoint to Ashoka's edicts, speaking of military campaigns, the restoration of Kalinga's glory, and the patronage of Jainism, deliberately ignoring the Buddhist pacifism that had once defined the region after its conquest. The Shunga dynasty itself controlled a much-reduced kingdom, centered on Magadha and parts of central India. Their rule was marked by a Brahminical revival, but they were not all-powerful. They faced constant threats, not least from the Bactrian Greeks to their west and the nascent kingdoms to their south. The unified political entity that Chandragupta and Chanakya had forged was now a memory. Chapter 11: The Silent Witnesses. Yet, the Mauryan Empire refused to vanish completely. Its physical presence endured in the very landscape of India, silent and stubborn. The most visible legacies were the stone pillars. Across the vast expanse from Sanchi to Sarnath, from Loriya Nandangarh to the Nepal Terai, the polished sandstone columns stood, their lustrous sheen defying the centuries. To the villagers who lived in their shadow, they were the work of gods or giants. The lion capital at Sarnath, the bull at Rampurva, the elephant at Sankesa, these magnificent animal sculptures were objects of local reverence, their original message lost but their majestic power undimmed. They were permanent fixtures, geographical markers of an authority that had once been universal. Similarly, the great stupas, like the one at Sanchi, which Ashoka had begun, continued to grow. Though the Shungas and Satavahanas added their own gateways and embellishments, they were building upon a Mauryan foundation. The core of the structure, the solid, hemispherical dome representing the cosmos, was a Mauryan idea. The empire lived on in the very architecture of devotion. Beneath the earth, the Mauryan system proved even more resilient. The administrative structure detailed in the Arthashastra, the village, grama, headed by a gramika, grouped into a district, sangrahana, under a sthanika, and further into a province under a kamara or mahamatra, was too efficient to discard. The subsequent kingdoms, from the Shungas to the Guptas, adopted and adapted this framework. The meticulous land records, the system of taxation, the hierarchy of officials, these were the invisible, enduring threads of the Mauryan tapestry, rewoven into the fabric of every succeeding state. Chapter 12: The Rediscovery of a Lost Ideal. For over 2,000 years, the historical memory of the Mauryas survived in fragments. Buddhist texts like the Mahavamsa and the Ashokavadana preserved the legend of the great Emperor Ashoka, the righteous Dharmashoka. To them, he was the model Buddhist king, the patron of the Third Buddhist Council, the man who sent his own son and daughter, Mahinda and Sanghamitta, to spread the faith in Sri Lanka. In the Brahminical Puranas, the Mauryas were merely a line in a list of dynasties, noted for their low birth and their eventual overthrow by the righteous Shungas. The man who truly resurrected the Mauryan Empire from the dust of history was not a king, but a scholar. In the 1830s, James Prinsep, an officer in the British East India Company and a brilliant numismatist and epigraphist, was stationed in Calcutta. He was fascinated by the strange inscriptions found on pillars and rocks all over India, all written in the same unknown script. For years, he labored. The breakthrough came with a series of coins from the Indo-Greek kings. They bore bilingual inscriptions, Greek and a script that looked similar to the one on the pillars. By comparing the names of the Greek kings on the coins with the unknown script, Prinsep began to crack the code. He realized the language was a form of Prakrit, and the script, which he named Brahmi, was the mother of most modern Indian scripts. As the script yielded its secrets, a singular name began to appear and reappear on edicts from Kandahar to Orissa, Devanampiya Payadasai, the beloved of the gods, he who looks with affection. Initially, Prinsep believed this to be a mythical figure or a Sri Lankan king. But through cross-referencing with the Sri Lankan Buddhist chronicles, the truth dawned. Devanampiya Payadasai was the title of the legendary Emperor Ashoka. Suddenly, the silent stones began to speak. The scattered pillars and rocks were not isolated monuments, they were nodes in a vast network of imperial communication. Prinsep and the scholars who followed him had uncovered not just a language, but a lost empire and a unique philosophical voice. The edicts revealed a ruler of astonishing modernity, a king consumed not by a desire for glory, but by a profound concern for the moral and material welfare of his subjects. Epilogue: The Double-Edged Legacy. The legacy of the Maurya Empire is a complex and double-edged one, its two greatest figures representing two opposing poles of statecraft. On one side stands Chandragupta Maurya, the architect of power. With Chanakya as his guide, he demonstrated the potential of a centralized, bureaucratic state. His legacy is one of realpolitik, of administration, of military might, and of geopolitical acumen. He proved that the fractured subcontinent could be unified under a single, formidable will. The Arthashastra remains the ultimate manual of this school of thought, ruthless, pragmatic, and devastatingly effective. On the other side stands his grandson, Ashoka. His legacy is the power of conscience. He demonstrated that even the most powerful state machinery could be redirected towards an ethical purpose. His Dhamma was an attempt to build a moral empire, to govern through persuasion and welfare rather than pure coercion. He represents the idea that the ultimate duty of a state is not just to control territory, but to improve the lives of its citizens. The subsequent history of India can be seen as a tension between these two models, the Chandraguptan state of power and the Ashokan state of righteousness. The ideal king, the Chakravartin, was expected to embody both. The physical symbols of the Mauryas have been reclaimed by modern India. The lion capital of Ashoka from Sarnath is the official emblem of the Republic of India. The Ashoka Chakra, the 24-spoked wheel from his abacus, sits at the center of the Indian national flag. These are not just decorative symbols, they are a conscious invocation of a foundational past. They harken back to the first time India was a unified political entity, and they specifically choose the legacy of Ashoka, the legacy of nonviolence, tolerance, and moral governance as the guiding ideal for the world's largest democracy. The story of the Maurya Empire is thus more than a history. It is the story of India's first great attempt to answer the perennial question of governance: what is the purpose of power? The pillars that still stand across the land are not merely relics. They are eternal questions, carved in stone, waiting for every generation to find its own answer. The empire fell, but its echo never faded, a whisper of rock and conscience that continues to shape a nation's soul. The fall of the Shungas did not end the story of the Mauryas, it merely transformed it from a narrative of kings and conquests into one of ideas and identity. The empire's physical structures were repurposed, its administrative systems were absorbed, and its memory was curated, forgotten, and then spectacularly rediscovered. This final chapter explores how the Maurya Empire, particularly the figure of Ashoka, has been interpreted, reimagined, and weaponized in the modern and contemporary eras, becoming a potent symbol in the forging of the Indian nation-state. Chapter 13, The Imperial Reclamation and the Nationalist Symbol. The British colonial administration, through scholars like James Prinsep, had unearthed the Mauryan Empire as a historical fact. But for a rising Indian nationalist movement in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this discovery was a godsend. It provided a powerful counter-narrative to the British claim that India was perpetually divided, backward, and in need of enlightened foreign rule. Here was evidence of a vast, sophisticated, and native Indian empire that had not only united the subcontinent but had also maintained diplomatic relations with the Hellenistic world. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister and a central figure in the independence movement, was profoundly influenced by the Mauryan story. In his classic work, The Discovery of India, written in prison, he dwelled at length on Ashoka. To Nehru, Ashoka was a figure of stunning modernity. He saw in the Ashokan edicts a model of secular, tolerant, and welfare-oriented governance that was perfectly suited for the diverse, nascent Indian Republic. The Mauryan Empire, for Nehru, was not a Hindu empire, it was an Indian empire, one that predated and transcended religious sectarianism. This vision directly influenced the iconography of the new republic. The adoption of the Sarnath lion capital as the national emblem and the Ashoka chakra on the national flag was a deliberate and profound choice. It was a rejection of symbols associated with later, more religiously defined empires, like the Mughal, in favor of one that represented unity, ancient glory, and a moral compass. The lions, powerful yet serene, symbolized the ideal that strength was to be exercised with justice and restraint. The wheel represented cosmic law, dharma, and peaceful progress. Chapter 14, Ashoka, the Cinematic and Popular Reimagining. The 20th century saw Ashoka's legend move from scholarly texts and political discourse into popular culture. The most significant milestone was the 2001 Bollywood film, Ashoka, starring Shah Rukh Khan. While taking immense creative liberties with the historical narrative, the film was instrumental in introducing the emperor to a new, massive generation. It framed his life as a grand, tragic romance, with the Kalinga War as the pivotal moment of personal and philosophical transformation. The film, despite its inaccuracies, captured the essential drama of Ashoka's journey, from ambition to cruelty, from despair to enlightenment. This popular portrayal cemented a specific image of Ashoka in the public mind, the angry, violent prince who finds peace and redemption. It simplified the complex historical figure into a relatable archetype, the flawed man who overcomes his inner demons. This narrative has proven incredibly resilient, appearing in comic books, television series, and video games, ensuring that the name Ashoka is now as much a part of modern Indian pop mythology as it is of ancient history. Chapter 15: The Political and Ideological Battleground. In recent decades, the legacy of the Mauryas, and particularly the interpretation of Ashoka's reign, has become an ideological battleground. The rise of Hindu nationalism has prompted a re-examination of the Mauryan period through a different lens. Some nationalist historians have sought to reclaim Chandragupta Maurya and Chanakya as Hindu heroes, emphasizing their strategic genius in expelling foreign, Greek, invaders and establishing a powerful native empire. Chanakya, in particular, is often held up as the ultimate patriot and political mastermind. His Arthashastra is cited as evidence of a sophisticated, indigenous science of statecraft that rivaled anything in the West. However, this narrative struggles with Ashoka. His profound commitment to Buddhism and his policy of non-violence are sometimes viewed with ambivalence within strands of Hindu nationalist thought that valorize martial strength. Some interpretations attempt to downplay his Buddhist pacifism, arguing that his Dhamma was a secular ethical code and that he never fully disbanded his army. The focus, instead, is shifted to the latter part of his reign, which some historians argue saw a decline in administrative control, implicitly linking his pacifism with the eventual weakening of the empire. This debate highlights a central tension: is the Maurya Empire's primary legacy one of unparalleled power, Chandragupta, or of conscious renunciation of that power, Ashoka? The modern Indian state has officially chosen the latter as its guiding symbol, but the former continues to hold a powerful allure. Chapter 16: An Enduring Echo in a Global Context. The relevance of the Mauryan Empire extends beyond India's borders. In the post-World War II world, Ashoka emerged as a figure of global significance. He was celebrated by thinkers and leaders as a precursor to the modern concept of a welfare state. His renunciation of war after victory at Kalinga found echoes in the global revulsion towards the horrors of war that led to the founding of the United Nations. The UNESCO's decision to designate the Ashokan Pillars and other Mauryan sites as World Heritage Sites cemented their status as treasures of all humanity. The pillars are not just Indian artifacts, they are milestones in the intellectual and spiritual history of humankind. They represent one of the first attempts by a ruler to communicate a philosophy of social and personal ethics directly to his entire populace, transcending the usual proclamations of conquest and divine right. Furthermore, Ashoka's missions to spread Dhamma, sent as far as Syria, Egypt, and Greece, represent an early form of cultural diplomacy. He was not sending armies, but emissaries of an idea. In an age of globalization, this model of soft power predates the term by over 2 millennia. Final reflection: the unbroken wheel. The story of the Maurya Empire is not a linear narrative that ended in 185 BCE. It is a cyclical one, whose themes resurface with each passing era. The questions the Mauryas grappled with are timeless. What is the balance between central control and regional autonomy? Can a state be both powerful and ethical? What is the responsibility of a government towards the well-being of its most vulnerable citizens? How does a diverse society build a common identity? Chandragupta and Chanakya provided one set of answers, grounded in the pragmatic science of power. Ashoka provided another, grounded in the transformative power of conscience. The subsequent 2 millennia of Indian history have been a continuous dialogue between these two poles. The polished sandstone pillars, standing in fields and town squares, have witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties. They saw the Guptas, the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughals, and the British Raj come and go. Through it all, they remained, their message temporarily forgotten but their imposing presence a constant reminder of a foundational unity. Today, when an Indian citizen looks at their currency, their passport, or the flag flying high, they are confronted by the symbols of the Mauryas. The lions do not roar of war, but of a peace upheld by law. The wheel does not crush, but moves forward, representing the eternal cycle of cause and effect and the duty to act righteously. The Maurya Empire, therefore, never truly fell. It fragmented politically, but its ideas were woven into the DNA of the subcontinent. It lives on in the administrative structures of the state, in the philosophical debates about governance, and in the symbolic heart of the nation. The empire of Chandragupta, Bindusara, and Ashoka remains, in the most profound sense, a living empire, its story still being written in the ongoing experiment that is modern India. The wheel of Dharma set in motion by Ashoka continues to turn, an unbroken circle connecting a glorious past to an aspirational future. While the chronicles of kings, battles, and imperial edicts form the grand narrative of the Maurya Empire, its true substance lay in the rhythms of daily life, the flow of commerce, and the vibrant cultural exchanges that its unprecedented unity made possible. To step into the Mauryan world is not just to stand before a polished pillar, but to walk the bustling streets of its cities, to smell the spices in its ports, and to listen to the debates in its halls of learning. Chapter 17, The Pulse of Prosperity, Trade and Economy. The single most important economic reform of the Mauryas, as dictated by the Arthashastra, was the establishment of a single, unified currency and a standardized system of weights and measures. The panna, a silver coin, became the reliable medium of exchange across the empire, from Taxila to Tamralipti. This financial stability supercharged both internal and external trade. Internally, the Grand Trunk Road, which had existed in parts for centuries, was consolidated, improved, and secured by the Mauryan administration. Stretching from the northwest frontier to the Ganges Delta, it became the subcontinent's primary economic artery. Caravans of bullock carts, laden with goods, could travel in relative safety, their journeys facilitated by rest houses, wells, and shade trees planted by state decree. On this road, the cotton textiles of the Gangetic plains met the woolen goods of the northwest, the diamonds of the Deccan were traded for the pearls of the southern coast, and the Himalayan herbs were exchanged for the spices of the eastern hills. Externally, the Mauryan control over both the Indus and Ganges river systems, as well as key ports like Barakacha, Badajoz, on the west coast and Tamralipti, Tamluk, on the east, positioned the empire as a central hub in a nascent global economy. Megasthenes and other Greek accounts speak of a thriving trade with the Seleucid Empire. Indian exports included precious stones, pearls, ivory, fine muslin cloth, and, most famously, spices like pepper and cinnamon. In return, the empire imported gold, silver, wine, and fine glassware from the west. The state was not a passive observer in this economic boom. The Arthashastra details a complex system of oversight. The Sanadata, chief treasurer, and the Samaharta, collector general, presided over a network of customs officers, toll collectors, and market superintendents, Panyadhyaksha. These officials ensured the quality of goods, prevented fraud, fixed fair prices, and collected the taxes and duties that filled the imperial treasury. They also managed the state's own monopolies on key commodities like mining, especially for gold and iron, salt production, and the manufacture of weapons and armor. Chapter 18, The Mosaic of Faith, Religion and Society. The Mauryan period was a time of extraordinary religious ferment. The Vedic sacrificial religion, presided over by Brahmins, coexisted and competed with the heterodox Shramanic, ascetic, traditions that emphasized individual spiritual effort over ritual. Brahmanism, with its rigid social hierarchy embodied in the Varna, caste, system, was the established social order. The Arthashastra, while pragmatic and often amoral, acknowledges and reinforces this structure, seeing social stability as paramount. Yet, it was the heterodox faiths that saw their golden age under the Mauryas. Jainism, with its strict doctrine of nonviolence, ahimsa, found a powerful patron in Chandragupta Maurya himself, according to Jain tradition. But it was Buddhism that achieved its most spectacular growth under Ashoka. The emperor's personal conversion and his massive patronage, building thousands of stupas, supporting the monastic community, Sangha, and sending missionaries far and wide, catapulted a regional sect into a world religion. The Third Buddhist Council, held at Pataliputra under his patronage, was a pivotal event in standardizing Buddhist doctrine and organizing its missionary activities. Ashoka's own Dhamma was a masterful, if unique, synthesis. It was not state-enforced Buddhism. Instead, it cherry-picked ethical principles common to all the major traditions: respect for elders, kindness to servants, truthfulness, compassion for all living beings, and religious tolerance. In his major rock Edict 12, he explicitly calls for respect for all sects. Growth and essentials of religion is possible in many ways. But its root is restraint in speech, that is, not praising one's own sect or disparaging the sect of others without reason. Concord is meritorious. This policy created a public sphere where Brahmins, Buddhists, Jains, and Ajivikas could debate and proselytize in a climate of state-sanctioned, if not always perfectly practiced, tolerance. The social world of the Mauryan era was thus a complex mosaic, where a Brahmin priest performing a fire sacrifice, a Buddhist monk meditating in a cave, and a Jain ascetic practicing extreme austerity could all be subjects of the same emperor. Chapter 19, The City of Splendor, A Day in Pataliputra. To understand the zenith of Mauryan power and sophistication, one must imagine a day in its capital, Pataliputra. Greek ambassadors like Megasthenes left descriptions that speak of a city of breathtaking scale and grandeur, situated at the confluence of the Sun and Ganges rivers. The city was protected by a massive wooden palisade, punctuated by 64 gates and 570 towers, a fortification that inspired awe in foreign visitors. Within these walls lay a meticulously planned metropolis. The streets were laid out in a grid pattern, with separate quarters for different crafts and trades: the Potter's Lane, the Weaver's District, the Ivory Carver's Market. At the heart of the city was the Royal Palace, a complex of buildings that, while likely built of wood, hence its disappearance, was said to rival the splendor of Persepolis. Its pillars were gilded and adorned with carvings of birds and foliage, its interiors were decorated with precious metals and stones. Life in Pataliputra was a spectacle of urban diversity. In the morning, one might see the officials, the ametyas, clad in fine cotton, being carried in palanquins to the various administrative buildings to manage the affairs of the empire. The traders, brisk negotiations taking place in the bustling market, where goods from across the known world were on display. The spies, the Gutapurishas, secret agents of the state, blending into the crowd, their identities and missions known only to their superiors, a living embodiment of the surveillance state described in the Arthashastra. The philosophers, heated debates in public squares between learned scholars of different religious and philosophical schools, their arguments attracting crowds of curious onlookers. The artisans, skilled craftsmen creating the exquisite Mauryan art, the polished stone sculpture, the intricate terracotta figurines, the fine northern black polished ware pottery that characterizes the period. As the sun set, the city would quieten, the smoke from countless hearths rising into the sky, a testament to the lives of millions who lived, worked, and dreamed under the umbrella of the Mauryan peace. Coda, the timeless question. The story of the Maurya Empire is, in its final analysis, the story of an idea tested on a colossal scale. It was the idea that a single political authority could bring order, prosperity, and even moral purpose to a vast and fantastically diverse land. Chandragupta and Chanakya proved it was possible through sheer force of will, strategic genius, and an administrative machinery of terrifying efficiency. They built the vessel. Bindusara proved the vessel was seaworthy, capable of holding its course. Ashoka, however, asked a more radical question: where should the vessel go? He dared to believe that the purpose of power was not merely its own perpetuation, but the elevation of those it governed. He tried to steer the mighty ship of state towards the distant star of Dharma. The empire's eventual fragmentation shows the immense difficulty of this project. The economic strains, the centrifugal forces of regional identity, and the sheer challenge of maintaining a moral fervor across generations ultimately proved insurmountable. Yet, the attempt itself left an indelible mark. The Mauryas bequeathed to India, and to the world, a permanent reference point. They are the proof of concept for a unified India. They are the ancient echo of the debate between the pragmatic and the ideal, the realist and the moralist. The polished pillars, therefore, are more than stone. They are frozen music, the score of a grand symphony composed for an entire civilization. We may have forgotten how to play it in its entirety, but its most powerful themes of unity, of justice, of conscience still resonate, waiting to be heard anew by every generation that looks upon the serene faces of the lions and turns the timeless wheel. Beyond the grand narratives of statecraft and the vibrant tapestry of daily life, the Mauryan Empire was shaped by forces less visible but no less potent. Its legacy is also intertwined with mysteries that have tantalized historians and archaeologists for centuries. To fully appreciate the Mauryan phenomenon, one must venture into the realms of the environmental, the scientific, and the unresolved. Chapter 20, The Unseen Hands, Women, Environment, and the Subaltern. The official records, the Arthashastra, and the edicts are overwhelmingly the voices of men in power. Yet, the empire was built and sustained by millions whose stories are lost to time. The role of women, while the patriarchal structure of the time limited their official roles, women were far from passive. The Arthashastra mentions female bodyguards for the king, Vishakanyas, spies, and artisans. Royal women wielded significant influence behind the scenes. Ashoka's queen, Karavaki, is the only one of his wives to be named in his edicts, in an inscription concerning charitable donations, suggesting her independent status and wealth. His daughter, Sanghamitta, and his son's wife, Devi, were instrumental in establishing the Buddhist Sangha in Sri Lanka, acting as powerful religious ambassadors. In the economic sphere, women were involved in spinning, weaving, pottery, and agriculture, forming the backbone of the household economy. Environmental management. The Mauryan state exhibited a remarkably modern understanding of environmental stewardship, largely driven by both economic necessity and the ideological push of ahimsa. The Arthashastra has detailed chapters on forestry, mandating the protection of forests that provided timber for elephants, a critical military resource. The planting of banyan and mango trees along highways, as mentioned in Ashoka's edicts, provided shade for travelers and prevented soil erosion. The establishment of animal hospitals, a world first, was a direct result of the Buddhist Jain emphasis on non-violence, but it also reflected a holistic view of the kingdom's well-being, where the health of all creatures was seen as interconnected. The lives of the common people. For the average farmer, the Mauryan peace meant security from bandits and rival armies, but it also meant the heavy burden of the land tax, bhaga, which could be up to a quarter or a sixth of their produce. They lived in Wadalandab huts, their lives governed by the seasonal rhythms of the monsoon. Their world was one of local deities, village festivals, and oral traditions, largely untouched by the high philosophy of the court. Yet, the long arm of the state reached them through the tax collector, the corvée labor demands for public works, and the occasional sight of a royal official reading out an edict from the emperor, a voice from a distant, unimaginable center of power speaking of Dhamma. Chapter 21, The Sciences of Rule and Cosmos. The Mauryan era was not just a political and philosophical golden age, it was also a period of significant scientific and technological advancement, much of it state-sponsored. Engineering and architecture. The creation of the massive wooden fortifications of Pataliputra, the digging of irrigation canals, and the construction of the Grand Trunk Road required sophisticated engineering skills. But the Mauryans' most stunning technical achievement was their stone sculpture. The process of quarrying, transporting, carving, and, most mysteriously, polishing massive sandstone pillars to a lustrous, mirror-like finish remains a subject of awe. The technique, lost after the Mauryas, produced a surface so smooth that for centuries, locals believed it was the result of alchemical processes. Similarly, the rock-cut architecture, such as the Lomas Rishi Cave and the Barabar Hills, commissioned by Ashoka for Ajivaka ascetics, showcases an astonishing ability to mimic wooden structures in solid rock, a precursor to the great cave temples of later centuries. Knowledge systems. Pataliputra and Taxila were great centers of learning. While Taxila was renowned for its secular subjects like medicine, law, and military science, the Mauryan court itself became a hub for intellectual exchange. The need for accurate administration drove advances in mathematics and astronomy for calendar making and land measurement. The very existence of a text as systematic and encyclopedic as the Arthashastra points to a culture that valued the codification of knowledge, from economics and statecraft to agriculture, metallurgy, and mining. Chapter 22, The Lingering Enigmas. Despite all we know, the Mauryan Empire is shrouded in compelling mysteries. The secret of the polish. How did Mauryan artisans achieve the legendary Mauryan polish on their stone pillars and sculptures? Theories abound, from the use of progressively finer abrasives like diamond dust to the application of silica-based coatings that fused with the stone under heat. The exact formula and technique, however, have been lost, a testament to a unique technological pinnacle. The fate of the first emperor, the Jain tradition of Chandragupta's abdication and ritual suicide by starvation at Shravanabelagula, is powerful and deeply moving. Yet, it remains uncorroborated by archaeological evidence. Did the founder of India's first great empire truly end his life as a naked, penniless ascetic on a remote hilltop? Or does his story end elsewhere, lost to time? The lost tomb of Ashoka, for an emperor who left his words etched across the subcontinent, the final resting place of Ashoka the Great is unknown. The stupas said to contain his relics are later constructions. The location of his original tomb or the place of his cremation remains one of Indian archaeology's greatest unsolved puzzles. It is a strange silence for a man who spoke so directly and so publicly to the future. The contents of the Pataliputra library, classical sources hint at the existence of vast archives in Pataliputra, storing everything from administrative records and diplomatic correspondence to philosophical and scientific texts. If these archives, likely written on perishable materials like birch bark or palm leaves, had survived, our understanding of not just the Mauryas but of the entire ancient world would be transformed. Their loss is an incalculable tragedy. Finale, the eternal dialogue. The Mauryan Empire does not belong to a dead past. It is a living presence, a deep cultural memory that continues to inform the identity and aspirations of over 1 billion people. Its story is the foundational epic of the Indian nation. The dialogue between the two visions of empire, the Chandraguptan state of formidable power and the Ashokan state of compassionate dharma, is the central political and ethical dialogue of the subcontinent. It is a debate about the very soul of India. Is its destiny to be a mighty power, as Chanakya envisioned, or to be a moral exemplar, as Ashoka dreamed? Perhaps the true genius of the Mauryan legacy is that it refuses to let this question be settled. It insists that the answer must be sought anew by every generation. The silent lions on the Sarnath capital do not offer a simple solution. They pose a perpetual challenge, their 4 faces looking out in all directions, watching, waiting, reminding all who would govern that power must be tempered by purpose, and that the ultimate measure of an empire is not the territory it controls, but the dignity and welfare of the most humble subject within its care. The story of the Mauryas is, therefore, unfinished. It is a conversation that began in the council chambers of Pataliputra and now continues in the parliament of the world's largest democracy. The wheel set in motion by Ashoka has not stopped turning. It merely rolls on through the centuries, carrying with it the hopes, the contradictions, and the enduring promise of a united people striving for a more perfect union. The Mauryan Empire, for all its internal cohesion and grandeur, did not exist in a vacuum. Its rise, its policies, and its very existence sent ripples across the ancient world, influencing and being influenced by the great civilizations of the West and East. To see the Mauryas only within the confines of the subcontinent is to miss a crucial dimension of their historical significance. Chapter 23, The Diplomatic Web, Mauryas and the Hellenistic World. The treaty between Chandragupta and Seleucus I Nicator was far more than a simple peace accord. It was the birth of formal Indo-Mediterranean relations. The exchange of 500 war elephants for territorial concessions was a transaction that reshaped the balance of power in the Hellenistic world. Those Indian war elephants, a weapon system the Greeks had first encountered to their terror under Alexander, became the decisive force in Seleucus's victory over his rival, Antigonus, at the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BCE. For the next century, the descendants of Seleucus would rely on Indian elephants, acquired through the Mauryan alliance, as the cornerstone of their military might. This established a durable diplomatic corridor. The presence of Megasthenes as an ambassador in Pataliputra was not an isolated event. Dimachus followed as an envoy to Bindusara, and Dionysius was sent to Ashoka. These men were more than diplomats, they were ethnographers and geographers whose writings, though now lost in their original form, were extensively quoted by later Greek and Roman historians like Strabo, Arrian, and Pliny. It was through their accounts that the Western world first gained a detailed, if sometimes fanciful, picture of India, its immense size, its strange customs, its fantastical wildlife, and the sophistication of its philosophy and political systems. The influence was not one way. While direct Greek influence on Mauryan art and architecture is a subject of debate, the mere presence of these foreign embassies, with their different customs and ideas, must have contributed to the cosmopolitan atmosphere of Pataliputra. The Mauryan court's awareness of the wider Hellenistic world likely informed its own imperial self-image and its sophisticated approach to statecraft. Chapter 24, The Mission of Dharma, Ashoka's Soft Power. Ashoka took this diplomatic engagement to a revolutionary new level. His famous Rock Edict 13 mentions his missions to the Hellenistic kings, not to threaten or negotiate treaties, but to preach Dhamma. The conquest of Dhamma has been won by the beloved of the gods, both here and among all his neighbors, as far as 600 yojanas, about 4,800 miles, where the Yona, Greek, King Antiochos rules, and beyond Antiochos, the four kings named Ptolemy, Antigonos, Megas, and Alexander rule. This represents one of the earliest recorded instances of a state using soft power, the influence derived from cultural and ideological appeal rather than military or economic coercion. Ashoka was not sending soldiers, he was sending emissaries of an idea. He believed the ethical principles of Dhamma, nonviolence, respect, truthfulness, were universal and could ensure the welfare of all humanity, even his foreign counterparts. The impact of these missions is hard to gauge. There is no record of Antiochus II Theos or Ptolemy II Philadelphus converting to Buddhism. However, the edicts themselves have been found as far west as Kandahar in Afghanistan, inscribed in both Greek and Aramaic. The Kandahar Greek edict translates key concepts of Dhamma into Greek philosophical terms, presenting it as a form of enlightened wisdom. This suggests a deliberate and sophisticated effort to make the message resonate with a Hellenistic audience. While it may not have converted kings, it likely introduced Buddhist and Indian ethical ideas into the intellectual milieu of the Near East, perhaps planting seeds that would later influence Gnostic and ascetic traditions. Chapter 25, The Eastern Seas, Maritime Links and Cultural Diffusion. While the Western connections are well documented, the Mauryan gaze also looked eastward. The control of the port of Tamralipti on the Bengal coast gave the empire a gateway to Southeast Asia. Though large-scale Indian colonization of the region would come later, the Mauryan period likely saw the first significant wave of cultural and commercial exchange. Traders, and perhaps even the official missionaries Ashoka mentions sending to Suvarnabhumi, the land of gold, generally identified with parts of Southeast Asia, would have sailed from these ports. They carried with them not only trade goods but also the core concepts of statecraft, Sanskritic culture, and, most importantly, Buddhism. The early, foundational ideas of kingship and cosmology that would later flourish in the kingdoms of Funan, Srivijaya, and eventually the great temple complexes of Angkor and Borobudur, can trace their initial impetus back to this period of Mauryan outreach. The empire, therefore, acted as a crucial incubator and exporter of the civilizational models that would shape a vast cultural sphere across the Bay of Bengal. Book 9, The Echo in the Land, Archaeology and the Recovery of a Civilization. The grand narrative of the Mauryas, from Chanakya's conspiracies to Ashoka's remorse, would remain mere legend without the hard, material evidence unearthed by the spade. The rediscovery of the Mauryan Empire is one of archaeology's greatest triumphs. Chapter 26, Unearthing the Past, Key Discoveries. The pillars and rocks, the most visible legacies, their inscriptions were the key to unlocking the empire. The decipherment of Brahmi by James Prinsep was the foundational moment. Subsequent archaeological surveys, led by figures like Alexander Cunningham, systematically located and documented these monuments across India, slowly mapping the extent of Ashoka's dominion. Pataliputra excavations, modern excavations at Patna, ancient Pataliputra, have provided glimpses of the magnificent capital. The discovery of the massive wooden ramparts, aligned with Megasthenes' descriptions, confirmed the city's legendary scale. Finds of northern black polished ware, NBPW, the fine, glossy pottery that characterizes the Mauryan period along with terracotta figurines, beads, and punch-marked coins, have helped archaeologists build a detailed picture of material life in the heart of the empire. The Sanchi Stupa, while its famous gateways are later, Shunga period, the core of the Great Stupa at Sanchi is a massive brick hemisphere commissioned by Ashoka himself. Excavations here revealed relics believed to be of Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, two of the Buddha's chief disciples, which Ashoka had redistributed across his realm. Sanchi stands as a testament to the imperial patronage of Buddhism and the beginning of a monumental architectural tradition. The Ashokan edicts of Kandahar, the discovery of the bilingual Greek-Aramaic edict in Kandahar was a watershed. It provided irrefutable proof of the western limits of Ashoka's empire and demonstrated his active policy of communicating Dhamma to non-Indian populations, exactly as his Indian edicts claimed. Chapter 27, The Science of the Past, Modern Analysis. Contemporary archaeology goes beyond simply finding objects. Scientific techniques are now used to answer deeper questions about the Mauryan world. Archaeobotany and paleoclimatology, analysis of seed remains and pollen samples from Mauryan era sites is helping reconstruct the agricultural economy and diet of the time. Studies of climate patterns are investigating whether a period of reliable monsoons contributed to the agricultural surplus that funded the Mauryan state. Metallurgical analysis, studying Mauryan punch-marked coins and iron objects, such as the massive iron pillar at the Mauryan era site of Kodumanal, evidence of advanced smithing, reveals their composition and manufacturing techniques, shedding light on the empire's economic and technological capabilities. Remote sensing, technologies like LiDAR, light detection and ranging, are being used to peer beneath forest canopies in modern settlements to detect the remains of Mauryan roads, irrigation canals, and settlement patterns, allowing historians to understand the empire's footprint on the landscape in ways never before possible. Ultimate reflection, the Mauryan imprint. The story of the Maurya Empire is the story of a first draft, the first draft of a unified India, the first draft of a bureaucratic state, the first draft of a moral philosophy of governance. Like all first drafts, it was imperfect, containing contradictions that would eventually lead to its revision and collapse. Yet, its imprint is permanent. It established a mental map of India as a single, political-cultural entity, an idea that would never completely fade. It demonstrated the potential and the perils of absolute central power. It bequeathed a vocabulary of symbols, the lion, the wheel, the stupa, that remain charged with meaning. The empire's greatest legacy is its enduring question, what is power for? The Chandraguptan answer, order, security, and glory, and the Ashokan answer, compassion, welfare, and ethical living, continue to echo in the halls of power and in the aspirations of people everywhere. The Mauryas teach us that an empire's true longevity is not measured in the years of its dynasty, but in the centuries its ideas endure. By that measure, the empire of the peacock standard remains, more than 2 millennia later, very much alive.